Be thy vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art, thou my best thought.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, grant that through your spoken word we may behold your living presence. This is the fourth Sunday of Lent as we age ever closer to Easter. And here in the Diocese of Johannesburg, many of us clergy find ourselves asking, how do we effectively minister to our parishes during this time? How do we do this during this odd season of quarantining and social distancing and the suspension of services? How can we maintain our duties to the community to which we've been called to serve? The truth is, none of us have experienced this situation before, at least not to this magnitude. And I want to assure you that it is just as confusing and disorienting to us clergy as it is to you. But we recognize that we can't be near you physically, and this is but one way in which we can stay connected with you. Over the next few weeks, our society will be taking in all kinds of messages, voices that come from different corners, some helpful, some not, some simply a distraction, particularly during this time when most of us are lonely and perhaps feel isolated and anxious. But it is particularly during this time that we must never allow ourselves or allow these many voices to tempt our eyes away from God and our connection to community. Today's scripture readings speak of light and darkness, of restoration of sight out of blindness. In our reading in the first book of Samuel, we hear of a description of the anointing of David as the second king of Israel. In this story, God chooses the most unlikely candidate, the shepherd boy David, the youngest son of Jesse. God chooses him to be king. But in that telling of this story, we hear God cautioning Samuel as he looks at one son after another. And he says, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. This story illustrates how blind we can be in our judgments and how much we need God's help. The accompanying psalm, Psalm 23, that most comforting of psalms, celebrates the care and compassion of God. In verse 4, we hear that the psalmist is saying those words that have become so familiar to our ears. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. This means that even though circumstances can be challenging, yet we can still experience God's presence. We can still know that it is well with our souls. Notice that the psalmist is traveling through the darkest valley with enemies all around. And here, enemies can also be understood to mean calamity, danger, or threat. And when you come to think of it, not unlike the turmoil and threat that is caused by the coronavirus today, a threat that has compelled all of us to stay home on days on which we should be worshipping with our fellow brothers and sisters in a church building. This psalm reminds us that many of life's challenges will not go away, but we can experience God's presence even in the midst of turmoil and threat. In the second reading, the Apostle Paul's letter reminds the people of Ephesus of their new responsibilities as children of light. These are new converts to Christianity. And he says, "For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true." This was a reminder to them and is a reminder to us that we too are children of the light. And then our gospel reading, John chapter 9. This gospel is about the contrast of light and darkness, and healing and wholeness. The gospel gives the account of the cure of the blind man on the Sabbath, and how, interestingly enough, as he progressively sees more and more, the Pharisees, who were the leaders of the people of Israel at the time, who believed that they had spiritual insight, they began to see less and less. It starts with the disciples of Jesus, who see the blind man as a subject of an interesting debate. And the debate at the time was, well, this blindness that he has, who is to blame for it? Is it his parents? But that is a topic for another day. The gospel passage continues to outline the story, and we are told that Jesus spat on the ground, made a paste of mud, rubbed it into the blind man's eyes, and then asked him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. Incidentally, receiving sight does not come easy. And it is perhaps this that should say to us that it is a slow process. And in this encounter, the focus shifts from the blind man who can now see to the Pharisees who refuse to see the truth. They question the blind man. They question Jesus whether it is proper to heal on the Sabbath. They question Jesus whether he was acting in the power of God or the power of the evil. And the more they try to distort the truth, the more the blind man came to the defense of Jesus. This magnificent story tells us that light triumphs over darkness. It triumphs over truth, or rather, truth triumphs over untruth. Faith triumphs over disbelief. It also tells us that while physical blindness is certainly a terrible condition, spiritual blindness is much worse. One of the most dangerous spiritual situations we can live in is in the deluded notion that we can see clearly, especially if we're speaking spiritually. But when we come to think of it, the healthiest place to be in is not only when we acknowledge our spiritual blindness, but also when we recognize it and accept it as a place we often find ourselves in. In acknowledging our blindness, we find that the world around us is revealed more and more, and we begin to see a little more clearly each day. But the moment we think we have absolute certainty, that's often the time we find ourselves stumbling in the dark. Maybe because we have become too self-reliant, having forgotten our need for God. Acknowledging our spiritual blindness can be embarrassing and threatening, and it can be frustrating. After all, we want answers. It is a human trait, and we want them to be clear and precise. But one of the lessons that we learn now, that we're currently learning in living through the experience of COVID-19, is that we do not have certainty, nor the clarity, nor the precision that we so often rely on in our day-to-day lives. We today are facing the threat of disease, and we are all aware of the turmoil that is facing many South Africans, and indeed the rest of the world during this time. This challenge can so paralyze us with fear that we are driven to give up on our faith, or worse, to start blaming it on God. You have heard many times being said, God is punishing humanity for their sins through this virus. God is testing us. Well, if you subscribe to that kind of God, then you are still in the realm of darkness. COVID-19 is not a punishment sent by God. We know how it started. At least scientists have shed some light on that. But we also know that God can bring wholeness to a diseased situation. So why not take this time of compulsory social distancing to reflect on life in general, to reflect on its meaning, to reflect on how we live it, on how we can interact with others, particularly during a time when we are meant to be in isolation. And as we follow Jesus Christ to the cross during this Lenten period, we do so with courage and with hope, knowing that we are stewards of an amazing, life-giving God who is never a disinterested bystander in the ever-changing seasons of our lives. We are disciples of the living Christ, who restores sight where there is blindness, healing and wholeness where there is sickness, light where there is darkness, one who calls us to live courageously, especially during these uncertain times. So today's readings challenge us to walk in the light. God is with us in the threatening times, and God's all-embracing love surrounds us. And in living out this conviction, we can tap into resources that were beyond our imagination for the good of humanity and for our own good. May God's light continue to shine in our hearts, in our homes, and in our communities. And glory be to God, whose power, resting in us, can do infinitely more than we can ever ask or imagine. Amen.
Be thy vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, be thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Riches I heed not, no man's empty praise.